Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this episode of the MyCom Church Marketing Podcast. My name is Dan Wunderlich. I'm a United Methodist pastor, and today we're bringing you the next installment of our occasional feature called How We Work. On these special episodes, we feature interviews with real-life United Methodists digging into the practical details of how they do the work of church marketing and communications. But before we introduce today's guest, I want to first say thank you. As we wrap up 2018, all of us on the MyCom Podcast team wanted to say how grateful we are, not only to have you as listeners, but as the Apostle Paul put it in 1 Corinthians 3, you are our co-workers in the gospel. We talk about everything from Facebook to font selection and lots of other topics that can sound very technical at times, but this is all in service of the mission of making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And with that out of the way, it is now my pleasure to welcome today's guest, John Barolo. John is the Director of Communications at Hyde Park United Methodist Church in Tampa, Florida. John, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Dan. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's begin by having you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into church marketing and communications, and a little bit about Hyde Park and its ministry context.
All right. Well, I have been in full-time ministry work for the past about 20 years now. Well, maybe 19, just to be exact. But I've worked at 3 large United Methodist churches in Florida and Tennessee, and I've been at Hyde Park for just over 14 years now. So each phase of my ministry work early on, I've always had a passion for strategy and communication and promoting things back when I was a youth director. And then when I worked with small groups for 9 years at Hyde Park, it's one of those things where you can look back and sort of see how God's been helping you grow along the way and all the different places and such. And so it was always equally as important to me to help people know about everything we were doing as to actually do the stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't think that takes away from it at all about what we were doing, but I have always had a high value for helping as many people as possible know about what's going on and learning what it takes to tell the right people, get the right people involved so that everybody else comes to things. Learning all those things are important. And so for the last 4.5 years or so, I've been in communications at Hyde Park. I began as the associate director. And then when my boss retired a couple of years ago, I got a promotion to be the director. And it's been a wild, fun ride as we've gone through the pastoral transition from Jim Harnish, who had been our senior pastor for 22 years at the church, who retired. We had an interim pastor for 9 months from South Africa. And then Magreda Vega rejoined us on our staff as our senior pastor again after having been associate 8 years prior. So it's been a fun ride, and trying to keep everybody aligned in one direction is what we do every day.
Awesome. Well, there were 2 things in there I want to ask you about. First, how has being actually in ministry in a ministry area shaped how you work as a church communicator? Because I would imagine some of the folks that listen to this podcast, they're senior pastors or they're youth pastors or they're sort of the other duties as assigned on staff and have a lot of areas. But then some folks may just strictly be communications. Perhaps they came out of college with a communications degree, and so they've always worked in church communications, but maybe haven't been like the youth pastor or small group pastor. So I want to first ask you, how was your experience as in ministry areas shaped your work as a communicator?
That's a good question. So I think there's maybe 2 main areas for me. One is knowing what people are going through. And I say that as a church communicator, we have busy times, busy schedules. We're doing things on deadlines and stuff. But the difference is we're not planning and executing a programmatic ministry area every single week, And so for us, Sunday does come with regularity every single week. But at the same time, we're not up there on stage. We're not in the pulpit. We're not in the children's ministry area teaching children every single week. Yeah. We're not leading small groups every single week, whether we want to or not. So we get to be behind the scenes helping the people. Okay, so I think too often we can get bent on the idea that our need is more time sensitive than what the ministry area person's need is. And so if it's Wednesday and your children's director is working on a plan for Wednesday night, and you really need to get copy from them for a promotional item that you're doing, Wednesday afternoon at 4:00 is probably not the right time to go into their office and say, hey, Dawn, I really need you to fill this out now. Yeah. Otherwise, I'm not going to run this ad for you. And they're just thinking, I've got an hour or maybe 2 hours. until 100 kids show up. And I have to be ready to greet parents and to teach a lesson and maybe pray before I go and do this. And so I think that's where, as communicators, we can have a little bit more empathy and understanding, and perhaps even meet with them just for the sake of learning what their rhythm is and what goes into their work, so that when we do need to ask for things, we can go in at a more opportune time.
I think that's so smart, because it's real easy for communications folks to set hard deadlines based off of what is ideal for you without necessarily taking into consideration other people's schedules. And so I like that idea of maintaining personal relationships and finding out the rhythm of each person you work with. Well, the second question I want to ask you, this is our second installment of how we work. And we said we wanted to touch on churches of all sizes. And our first one was the United Methodist Church of the Resurrection, which is the largest one in the world. So any church is going to be of a different size. Can you tell us a little bit about Hyde Park? And if you've been there 14 years, then you have seen it grow into what it is now. Can you talk a little bit about Hyde Park, your new Portico campus, and sort of what the demographics and context of ministry is like for you all?
I will try to do my best there. Yes, it has continued to evolve over time. We are a church that has been around for just over 100 years, and we have a long heritage and tradition. And I like to tell people that at the same time that we have this heritage and tradition that we carry with us proudly, at the same time, we've always had a continued desire to move forward together in all we do. And so we try to find ways to have design and strategy that may not be cutting edge, but that's not the same way that we've done things for the last 20 years either. You know, we're always trying to learn from other places and how to do it. And so on any given Sunday, we may have just over 900 people at our two campuses. And on our Hyde Park campus, we have 5 different worship services currently on Sunday morning, and then we have one service in the evening at the Portico. And so while the Hyde Park campus, which is the one that has been there since the late 1800s and started originally from what was First United Methodist Church, has traditionally attracted people that have been established in Tampa. But at the same time, we've always been a place that draws people from the surrounding area as well. We like to think that we're a place where people that are different from each other can come and think and ask questions and wrestle with their thoughts about God and other people. You can be Republican, you can be Democrat, you can be old or young, rich or poor, homeless or not homeless. Anybody and everybody can come together at Hyde Park and grow and become more like God and learn how to love God and love other people more. And so what we're doing down at the Portico, that's a little bit different. You had mentioned that. So that is the campus that actually was First United Methodist Church of Tampa for many, many years, which was the church that birthed most of our churches across the Tampa Bay area at one point in time. And it was a handful of years ago now that the conference asked Hyde Park to begin new ministries there and to revitalize this campus. And so we have had a team of people working and continuing to work to reach out to people in downtown. And at this point in time, through the efforts of our staff there and our laity, we've been able to touch the lives of around 8,000 different people in the business world, in the arts community, and people doing revitalization efforts in downtown. And we have around 100 people that have been coming to a worship service on Sunday evenings, which has been a space where people can experiment with new ways of doing worship. They have contemplative moments during the service. They have interactive times. There are more lay people standing up leading elements of the service than we may have during, say, the 11 a.m. traditional service on the Hyde Park campus. And so just a different feel. We also have a cafe there, the Portico Cafe, which if you haven't been and you live anywhere in the state of Florida, I'd gladly invite you to come by. But we intentionally employ people there that are coming from life transition programs. So there's stories online that you can find where Mindy tells her story about the hardest moment in her life being when she had to give up her daughter, which was at the exact same time as the happiest moment in her life when her daughter was born. But it's because she was addicted to drugs. But through programs that she was in, and then through the job at the Portico Cafe, she's been able to move on with her life and to be able to restart and to create a better life for herself and her family. And it's really a great story. And there's many stories like that, but they're doing cool things there. So I don't know if that gives a little bit of a picture of the different types of people that we're able to impact between our more traditional campus at 500 Platt Street and our new old campus in downtown. But it's really pretty fun.
Yeah, well, and I thank you for laying that foundation because number one, I'm a little biased. I'm a fan of Hyde Park and the ministries that you do, but I wanted our audience and our listeners to understand where you're coming from. You not only you do traditional church communications, and you have a campus that features folks of all ages and all demographics, and then you also have this kind of new, alternative, fresh expressions type campus where you have touched the lives of 8,000 people, but really your worship attendance there is 100. And so you are finding ways to communicate and make connections in the community beyond just what's going on Sunday morning. And so that's sort of the context that I want people to think about as you're sharing some of your thoughts and tips and techniques and things like that, because they can apply to more than just Sunday morning. So John, let's start at the 30,000 foot level. How would you describe your approach to philosophies to church communications?
Great. Well, that's actually where I like to spend most of my time, is at the higher level there, 30,000 feet. And I can't claim these words as my own, but these are the words I'll use: as to do less with more impact. I believe that, and I say it all the time. No matter what we think, no one can do things very well if we do too many of them.
Yeah.
Whether you have 10,000 people or you have 10 people in the room, if you're trying to do too many things, we know it in our own lives. If we're stretched too thin, we do nothing well. And I really believe that in the church. And I think that's a hard thing it's a harder thing, I should say, for churches that have been around for a long time to get to and to agree on. Because after we've been established for a long time, it's hard to let go of certain things that have become treasures of all different people. So that's one: do less with more impact. The other thing is that to be able to set up a framework for how the communication staff person, depending on your size, works with the rest of the staff. And so we sort of have this matrix that we developed based on Ken Meyer's book, Less Chaos, Less Noise, where I like to say we own projects when we should. The over 80% of impact things, like worship services, things that affect lots and lots of people, some of our huge church-wide missions projects, we own a lot of the communicating for those things. The items that affect maybe 40% or so of the congregation, like a good portion, maybe an Advent group launch. So not as big as main group launch in the fall, which would be one of those big church things, but like an Advent group launch or maybe Lenten studies. We work hand in hand with the ministry people. So we assist when we can with those things. And then in other areas, we support when needed. And so if we are able to make a flyer for the children's ministry, per se, that needs something, because nothing else is going on, which there are times where that happens, then we can do that. But the reality is that most of the time, we would find our time better spent by helping them with resources, teaching them how to use an online designing tool like Canva, showing them where we get stock photos and stock graphics and things from for free, or if the church has subscription services to things, teaching them how to use all of those so that everything can still be on brand without the communications department having to always get down into the nitty-gritty details of each ministry area. And so that's a little bit of my philosophy there. Do less with more impact, own projects when we should, assist when we can, and support when needed. And I do believe that our role is to help all of our ministry areas communicate as effectively as possible to better reach the people that they're trying to reach. And that's something on Sunday mornings, and stop me if you need to, but on Sunday mornings, I always tell our preachers that if you need anything, just let me know. I'm here to help you sound as good as possible.
Yeah.
I'm not the one up there. You are. So if the way that I can help you communicate better is getting you a cup of coffee, I'm going to get you a cup of coffee or a cup of tea or whatever it is. If the way is for me to listen and give you any feedback before the next service, let me know. I can do that. And so I really feel like on Sunday morning, especially, my number one goal is to help our preachers be as good as they can possibly be and make sure that they're not caught in any of the weeds going on. So if people have questions and things, I try to keep the worship staff from having to deal with all the little things on the ground that might be going on.
Oh, John, you are a treasure, man. As a preacher that has a staff that is aware and responsive to what's going on with me, they can read my face on a Sunday morning and see if I need to be rescued from a conversation or, if I need a moment to step into my office. It's always wonderful to have folks like that. So I'm sure McGray and the whole pastoral team is grateful to have you. And one of the things that stuck out to me in that response is when you talked about being able to teach some of your ministry areas how to do some of the simple things of communication, like creating a flyer or a social media graphic by training them to use Canva. We always, as those of us who are senior pastors or those of us who are doing this communication thing in addition to other aspects of our job, we know that we're called to equip the saints. And oftentimes we think of equipping the saints as leading a Bible study or mentoring or discipleship and things like that. But you are very practically equipping the saints in your church so that it frees you up. And some of it, like you said, it depends on your schedule. But I would imagine some of the folks listening to our podcast now, again, the communications and marketing aspect are on top of other responsibilities, or maybe you're only 10 hours a week. And maybe it's really vitally important for you to be working on something like rebuilding the website or developing a content calendar for the next year. And so that flyer that may only take you 20 minutes may be enough to break your train of thought or add that one extra thing to your to-do list that tips the scale. So what are the kinds of things that you teach other people in your church to do, and what are the kinds of things that you think it's important for you to hold on to?
Good question. I will say that's a constant conversation to have. I think it depends on who's in the different roles. At certain times, there's volunteers that can help with different things. But in a regular world, let's say you're leading a meeting and it's going to be internal people from the church. I would highly encourage you to still use our style for how you even do that meeting outline. Now, not everybody may agree with me. That's one of those things where I do think it's important that we stay on message with fonts, branding, color, design, etc. But if you're going to pick something to not sort of get upset about with staff members, that would be the thing. If they're having a meeting and they made a handout and it doesn't match your design, it's not the end of the world. Now, if they're having a meeting and there's new people that are going to be there, I would say that's the first level where, yes, it should match your branding. If it's for children's ministries or youth ministries or adults or the whole church in general, it should match either their ministry areas specific branding or it should match the church's, because we don't want to miss an opportunity with guests, especially to help them get on board with who their church is and just to continue to reinforce who we are. And so you've got those levels and then you get to, let's say there's a handout that's going to second grade parents. So it's a little bit bigger at this point. What I've done is I've consulted with children's ministries at different points. I've helped them create some templates and things so that they can put stuff out. But I'm not going to have them show that to me beforehand, before it goes out, because I'm just going to trust that what's going out is good enough for those parents. We've worked together to develop stuff. But when you go beyond that, and let's say it's the flyer that's going to be out for 6 months telling people all about your children's ministries, and it's out in every brochure rack on campus. It could be handed out to new people on Sunday morning. So now that's different. That piece, the communication staff actually owns. And so when I say owns, I don't mean that we decide what goes on it, but we have told the children's ministries that we're going to design it all the way for you. You let us know what you like. You let us know what you need on it, and we will create it. And so we do that each year for them. We do that for the youth ministries, are those sort of one sheet things that stand out in our brochure racks people can pick up. Because to me, that's comparable to the website, to the web pages for those ministry areas. It's just in print form. And so that's a little bit of a hierarchy. We could get even into more detail, but I think that gives an idea.
Oh, and yeah, no, that's a good idea. I like thinking about who's the end user and how long is this going to be around? Like, how vital is this? Like, a flyer for trunk or treat 2 days before trunk or treat happens, maybe not a big deal. But that thing that is going to sit out or is going to try to attract community members to a new program, that's vitally important.
And now, a word from our sponsor. United Methodist Insurance wishes you a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Blessings for the coming year. United Methodist Insurance, property and casualty protection for your ministry. Visit uminsure.org.
Well, John, I know that you are passionate about not only messaging strategy, but developing a calendar to guide your work. Can you talk about why this is important and how it can be helpful both year round and during important big seasons and events like Advent and Christmas or Lent and Easter?
Sure. So the idea for a big calendar in my world actually came when I was leading small groups about 5 or 6 years ago. And I started to ask the question, am I going to keep promoting groups at the same time that other big things in the church are going on?
Yeah.
Because I was planning in my little world with my volunteers and maybe talking to the discipleship pastor over me at the time, depending on what groups were launching and things. And we all were like, oh, this is a great idea. And then I'd go to promote it and I find out there's a huge concert happening the same weekend that we're starting, or there's a huge family event that's going on, And so I started to ask the question, can we see everything on one calendar? I mean, could you imagine that, like in a bigger church?
Yeah.
And again, bigger doesn't have to mean just numbers of people, bigger as in lots of things going on. So if you're anywhere beyond just where you have one service, one small group, and one missions opportunity, I'd say you're a big place.
Yeah.
There's stuff going on. And I don't think many people can say they're down to just one. That would be really easy for communicating, but that may not even work. So anyways, back to the calendar. And so I started drawing it out in probably the most painful ways possible in InDesign with circles, because I realized that it wasn't sustainable.
Right.
So you also have to, if you're going to create something, do it in a format that can be edited easily, because people would ask me to edit things and then it would take a couple hours, which wasn't good. But you live and learn. So I created a landscape calendar with boxes that represented each month. And then what I did was I drew circles for each thing that was happening. And again, when I say each thing, I didn't go down to the actual like Sunday school classes that were happening, small groups, every single missions opportunity, but it was really all the things that we were telling people about. So if you're asking people to do anything, and when I say anything, it's, are you asking for money? Are you asking people to serve? Are you asking people to join a group? Are you asking people to come to something? Are you asking them to read scriptures? Are you asking them to literally do anything beyond just show up on Sunday morning? And if you're asking them to do anything beyond that, even if it's like asking them to come for Easter or for Christmas Eve, then it went on this calendar. And so what we started to see was you could visually see that between March and April, we probably had about 25 circles of things happening. Yeah. And then you get to like maybe May, and it's empty, which it kind of should be, because May is really busy for families. But what it does is it gives people an ability to look in their own context, where they're at with their community, because everybody's different, whether you're in a big city or a small town, and see where things happen. And then what we also realized, okay, we should overlay like the school calendar with this. We should overlay when things like the Super Bowl are, and when, in Tampa at least, when Gasparilla is. And I don't know, if you're in Daytona Beach, there's all kinds of big events that happen, right? And if you're in Orlando, if there's huge things that happen at Disney World at certain points, I'm just guessing here, but wherever you're at, there are big community things that happen.
Right.
And if we pretend that the church should compete with those, I really think we're doing a disservice. Because what we're telling people is, don't go be in your community, instead escape to your church, because we're going to do something more fun. And the reality is, most of the time, we really can't compete. I mean, what we can do is just not as fun as what sometimes a huge citywide party can be for people. And so by doing that, by laying out everything on there and being able to see the different layers, and we also put things like when sort of staff reviews happen, so some internal information as well, and just so we could kind of see a slice. That's gotten us to a place where we now use a Google Sheet. It's not the prettiest thing, but it works. It's shareable. And I've looked around at some different people's tools to do it, but we pretty much start on the left side, like 3 columns with what's going on in worship. And so we have our worship theme. We have our sermon series right there. And then the second column is the sermon topic for the week. And then that third column for worship is anything extra that's happening in worship that day, whether it's the children's choir singing, it's a communion Sunday, if it's a sit together Sunday, which is where our children's ministries shifts their programming for that Sunday and all the kids come in with their families. It's always great to know that it's a sit together Sunday when you're going to be talking about death and dying, or,
Yeah.
something like that. So that during our worship planning process, we're able to see, oh, look, that's a sit together Sunday. Let's take into account that we're probably going to have about 50 extra kids at least in the sanctuary this Sunday than on a normal week. And so instead of forgetting about it, by looking at this calendar that's like a slice of life for us, I think it's been helpful to be able to see stuff. So that's one way that it's used. And then so after you get past your worship columns, we have like the by the way. It's all that other stuff that's going on in people's lives, whether there's Valentine's Day, Super Bowl Sunday, Gasparilla, Thanksgiving, the things that are not liturgical days,
Right.
but things that take up mental space in people's lives. Because as I've learned from people, if we don't stop to think about what people are bringing in with them when they're coming to the church, then we're doing ourselves a disservice in how we're trying to speak to them, because they have needs. And instead of trying to meet those needs, too often we're trying to tell them what they need. And I think the church could get much better with that. And then so we move on from by the way, then the next two big columns are the asks, the big rocks. What are the two things that we're going to announce? And this took time. It took time to get from where on a Sunday we could announce anything. And I'm not saying that we were horrible and we announced like 10 things every week or something. And by the way, if you're listening and you announce 10 things, it doesn't mean you're horrible. Again, everybody has their own context, but I will say that it's been helpful. And the more that you do it and the more that you bring it down and people know that you're only going to have 2 announcements, it's helpful. But what was the most helpful part of this was doing it ahead of time. So once our pastors planned out the sermon series for at least 12 months in advance, then I was able to sit down with a team of a couple other staff people that lead in some higher level leadership positions and look out over the course of that time as well and take all those different things in consideration that I mentioned, whether it's the worship series, the things going on in people's lives, when small group launches are, when school things are happening, when there's 3-day weekends. And we're able to lay out when things are going to be announced. And by doing so, you actually, I wouldn't say that we create the rhythm of the life of the church together, but we sort of help the rhythm that's there rise to the top. Instead of potentially being drowned out by all the other noise, we let the most important rhythm that needs to be heard and to be felt to rise up. Then once you have it locked down, once your senior pastor has given the thumbs up on this, you can then distribute it to all the staff. They can choose to share it with their lay people as well, but this way people can see what's going on. And so I don't make it editable by everybody, but I do make it viewable by everybody so that they can see. And then this way, when you go in to meet with your missions team who has lots of passion and wants to do lots of things in the community, I can show them what's all happening, for instance. And then it helps them by being able to say, oh, maybe instead of doing the same thing we've always done in November, what if we moved it to January? What if on Christmas Eve when people show up, instead of only inviting them back for worship in January, we say, you know what? We're a church that believes that your life is important, but we also believe that it's important that we go and make a difference in our community. So starting in 2 weeks, we're going to be doing a drive to collect, and I'm just going to throw this out there, but we're going to be doing a drive to collect 2,000 jackets for kids in this school that's nearby that don't have adequate jackets, because we want to make sure that no child at this school gets cold. Like, I think that's something that people who are coming for the first time that may be skeptical about church could get behind.
Oh, yeah, totally. I think that's so smart. It's oftentimes the communications person or the person in your office that's putting together the bulletin that probably has a better sense of the church calendar than anyone else, perhaps even the senior pastor. And so you play not only a role of communication, but in some ways a little self-serving to make your job easier. You actually improve the ministry spacing of the church by letting people know the rhythms of the year overall, because you may be the only people actually looking at that. So that's really awesome. And John, we appreciate you sharing all of that. And now to wrap up the podcast, let's do a little bit of a lightning round. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and if you want to give us just a quick answer, that would be great. The first one, are there any apps, gadgets, or tools that you can't live without?
My phone, my computer, and talented people.
Awesome. And how do you keep track of what you have to do? Is there a to-do list app that you use? Are you a pen and paper, sticky note kind of guy? Your email inbox? How do you keep track?
A little bit of both, but we use Basecamp a lot for internal things. I think it's important that the entire staff that works with me is able to see all of our projects in alignment in one place.
Awesome. And where do you do most of your work? Where's your physical location for your best work?
I do at least 75% of my work in the office. It's a collaborative environment, and it's a 7 on the Enneagram and an ENFP on Myers-Briggs. I work much better around people.
Yeah. And so to expand on that, what kind of environment brings the best work out of you?
So I would say when the people that I'm working with know what our shared goal is, I can work better, and I believe they can work better. And when we know what the shared goal is that we're all part of, that's the ultimate environment for everybody to thrive in.
Do you have one tip, shortcut, or hack that you're dying to share with people?
Contrary to probably how I spoke here, I would say to use less words. We all have the tendency to say more than what is needed to get a point across. And so use less words. And to do that, here's the hack, is have someone else proofread your work, because we all need a proofreader.
And lastly, if a church had $100 to invest in outreach, how would you recommend they spend it?
Social media advertising, either Facebook and or Instagram, depending on who exactly you're trying to reach.
All right. I lied. We do have one more question I want to ask you. What other churches, businesses, or brands do you follow when you're looking for inspiration?
I like to follow Crosspoint Church in Nashville, Tennessee, Westridge Church in Georgia. For some brands, I like Fast Company, Banana Republic, Apple, Food 52, Schoolhouse Electric, West Elm. And then I would also say there's a lot of local coffee and beer companies that are doing great advertising now. So whether you like coffee or beer, or it could be a tea place, local food companies, but all these, we have to think about these small restaurants that are trying to make a name for themselves too, and trying to get out there. And some of them are doing it really, really well. So.
Right. And if they're local and they're successful, then they know how to talk to the people in your area. So they would be great people to learn from.
Exactly.
And John, if anyone wants to follow your work, follow Hyde Park, reach out and say hi, what's the best way for them to do that?
I'd say just send me an email. You can find me on the church website at hydeparkumc.org on our staff page. Or you can email me at jbarolo, that's JBAROLO at hydeparkumc.org.
Awesome. John, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Dan.
All right. And listeners, once again, thank you so much for an amazing 2018. It has been a great year of diving into all of these church communications topics. And we always want to hear from you. So you can email us at podcast@umcom.org. That's podcast@umcom.org. We would love to hear from you. Who is doing communication well in the United Methodist Church? Who should we highlight on a future episode of How We Work? And what kinds of questions should we ask them? And of course, you can always use that email to send us any feedback or topic suggestions for the show. We always love hearing from you. We pray that you have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. We will be back in 2019. And finally, for the final time this year, I do want to ask you, if you have found this podcast to be helpful and you'd like to make sure other church communicators like yourself find this resource, the two biggest things you can do are to share this episode with your friends and colleagues and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, or whatever service you're using to listen to us right now. Thanks again for listening to the MyCom Church Marketing Podcast.